July 28, 1944, Normandy, France. Staff Sergeant Robert Dusty watched his third get destroyed in 2 days, not by enemy fire, by something far more insidious. The tank hadn't even seen the tiger that killed it. Because 400 yards before they reached the engagement zone, a massive cloud of dust rose behind's column like a smoke signal screaming, "American tanks here, shoot now." The German gunner didn't need optics. He just aimed at the dust cloud and fired. 5 men gone because of dirt. This is the story of 3 problems the history books buried. Problems that had nothing to do with armor thickness or gun. Problems so mundane, so embarrassing, that even 80 years later, most people have never heard about them. The dust signature problem, the radio frequency disaster, and the ammunition stowage death trap. These weren't engineering failures. They were oversights that cost hundreds of lives, until a handful of tank crews figured out solutions the manuals never taught. Let's get something straight first. There wasn't a bad tank. By 1944, the M4 was the most mass-produced medium tank in history. Reliable, fast, easy to maintain. The tank that won World War II through sheer numbers and logistics. But it had one critical flaw. It was fighting the wrong war. It was designed in 1940-41 to fight the tanks Germany had then. The Panzer III, the early Panzer IV, tanks with 50-60 of frontal armor. Against those targets, the 75 gun was perfect. But by Normandy, in 1944, the Germans weren't fielding Panzer IIIs anymore. They were fielding Tigers, Panthers, King Tigers. Tanks with 100-150 of frontal armor. Tanks with 88 cannons that could punch through a front plate from over a mile away. The math was brutal. Tiger 88 gun, effective range against 2,000 yards. 75 gun, effective range against Tiger 300 yards. You needed to get within 3 football fields to even have a chance. And that's where our 3 problems begin. This isn't a story about generals or engineers in Detroit. This is about 3 tank commanders who figured out field solutions to problems that were killing their friends. Staff Sergeant Robert, 2nd Armored Division, Lieutenant Webb, 3rd Armored Division, and Sergeant First Class James, 4th Armored Division. 3 men who never met each other, who each discovered one piece of the puzzle. By September 1944, their solutions would become unofficial doctrine across the European. Let's talk about how. June 1944, 2 weeks after D-Day. Robert was a pre-war mechanic from Oklahoma, the kind of guy who understood machines instinctively. He'd been driving tractors since age 12, working harvest crews across the Dust Bowl. He knew dust. And in Normandy, he watched it kill his friends. The problem was simple physics. The weighed 30 tons, lighter than German heavy tanks, which meant less ground pressure, which sounds good until you realize what that means on dry Norman soil. Every time a moved at speed 20, 25 across country, its treads pulverized the topsoil into fine particles. In dry conditions, each tank created a dust plume visible from 800 yards away. From a German Tiger commander's perspective, you didn't need to spot the tank itself. You just watched for the telltale brown-gray cloud rising above the hedgerows. Then you aimed at the base of the cloud and fired. Watched it happen 3 times in the first 2 weeks. The worst part, American doctrine encouraged fast movement. Speed is armor, they said. The you move, the harder you are to hit. Except when your movement creates a target marker visible from half a mile away. On July 15th, started keeping a notebook, not official after-action reports, personal observations. July 15, dry conditions, wind 510 from west. Lead tank kicked up dust visible for at least 600 yards, took fire within 90 seconds of movement. July 17, morning fog, ground still wet from night rain. Moved 2 miles, no enemy contact. Visibility on our dust, maybe 100 yards maximum. July 19, 3 tanks lost. All during afternoon movement, dry conditions, pattern is clear. Noticed something the tactical manuals missed. Timing attacks around weather wasn't cowardice, it was survival. On July 23rd, tried something that would have gotten him laughed out of any official planning meeting. He borrowed 2 water trucks from the engineers. The plan was absurdly simple. Before any major movement, the water trucks would pre-wet the route, not flooding it, just enough moisture to bind the topsoil and prevent dust clouds. His company commander thought he was insane. "Sergeant, we don't have time for this. We need to advance now." Pointed at the 3 burning from that morning's attack. Sir, those crews didn't have time either. July 25th. Platoon had to move 3 miles through open country to support an infantry assault. Normally, this would be a death sentence. 3 miles of dust, clouds announcing their position to every German gun within visual range. Water trucks sprayed the route 30 minutes before movement. A 50-yard wide path, just damp enough to suppress dust. The platoon moved at 20, fast enough to matter, slow enough to stay in the path. From his command position, he could see the difference immediately. Instead of massive dust plumes, just faint wisps. Nothing that would be visible beyond 150 yards. They made it to the objective. All 5 tanks, 0 casualties. Word spread fast in armor units. Not through official channels, through the informal network of tank crews talking to each other at supply depots and field maintenance areas. "Hey, you hear what's doing? Water trucks before movement." By August, multiple armored units were implementing variations. Pre-wetting routes. When time and water supply allowed, engineer units would spray planned movement corridors. Rain timing. Veteran crews would delay attacks 2–3 hours if rain was forecast, letting natural moisture solve the problem. Oil mixture. Some inventive crews used engine oil with water, created a temporary, paved surface that lasted even longer. Night movement priority. Moving under cover of darkness when dust wasn't visible became standard practice. Single-file spacing. Instead of line formation, tanks would follow the exact same track, preventing multiple dust sources. Here's the weird part. This never became official doctrine. If you read U.S. Army field manuals from 1944–45, you won't find a single mention of dust signature management. Why? Because acknowledging it would mean admitting that basic movement tactics were getting crews killed. It would mean admitting that the manuals written by officers in safe headquarters had missed something obvious to the men actually doing the fighting. But in the field, dust discipline became as important as radio discipline or fire discipline. Experienced tank commanders would check wind direction, soil moisture, and time of day before planning any movement. The formal after-action reports called it tactical movement timing. The tank crews called it not dying from dirt. Lieutenant Webb had a different problem. Webb was a signals officer before the war. Radio communications was his specialty, which made what he discovered in Normandy even more frustrating. Thus radios couldn't talk to the people who could save them. Here's the setup. Tanks used the SCR 528 radio for tank-to-tank communication. Frequency range, 27:38:9 m. Effective range, 1–3 miles depending on terrain. Perfect for coordinating between tanks. But supporting artillery used the SCR-193. Frequency range, 458 m. Completely incompatibles. And infantry units used the SCR-300 walkie-talkie. Frequency range, 40–48 m. Also incompatible. This meant that in combat, if a crew spotted an enemy position that needed artillery support, they had two options. Radio back to battalion headquarters, who would relay to Artillery Fire Direction Center, who would relay to the guns, adding 5–10 minutes minimum. Use a physical runner to carry messages, adding 10–20 minutes, and risking a man's life. June 13, 1944, the town of Bocage. British 7th Armored Division ran straight into SS Michael's Tiger tank. The result was catastrophic, destroyed 14 tanks and 15 other vehicles in 15 minutes. The British tankers knew they needed artillery support. They could seize position. They had artillery ready to fire. But they couldn't coordinate fast enough. By the time the fire mission worked its way through the radio relay system, had already repositioned twice. Webb studied the after-action reports and saw the pattern immediately. Every major tank engagement with German heavies shows the same delay, 8–12 minutes from enemy contact to effective artillery support. In that time, the enemy repositions or the moment is lost. We are fighting with one hand tied behind our backs because our radios can't talk to each other. Webb's solution was elegantly simple. If the radios couldn't talk to each other, use a translator. He proposed designating one per company as a relay tank. The relay tank would carry both radio systems. Standard SCR-528 for tank-to-tank communication. Modified SCR-193 for artillery coordination. The relay tank would position itself 200–300 yards behind the fighting line, close enough to receive tank reports, far enough back to have good radio propagation for long-range artillery comms. When a tank spotted an enemy that needed artillery, the process became: Tank Commander, 3 seconds. Relay 6, this is easy 2, enemy armor, grid 274–893. Relay Tank Operator, 5 seconds. Plots position, switches to artillery net. Relay to artillery, 10 seconds. Fire mission, priority target. Artillery response, 30–45 seconds, ranging shots. Total time, 60–90 seconds instead of 10 minutes. But Webb knew radios fail. They get damaged, batteries die, atmospheric conditions interfere. So he borrowed an idea from the Navy: visual signals. Webb's company developed a smoke protocol. White smoke, enemy armor spotted, need support. Yellow smoke, enemy infantry, need suppression fire. Red smoke, friendly unit in trouble, emergency fire mission. Green smoke, mission success, lifting fire. The smoke grenades were standard issue anyway. Webb just gave them meaning. Crucially, the relay tank would watch for smoke signals if radio communication failed, then use hand signals or written notes delivered by runner to artillery forward observers. It sounds primitive, but it worked. July 30th, 1944, Operation Cobra, the American breakout from Normandy. Webb's company was advancing through the peninsula when they ran into a prepared German position, 2 Panthers and a Tiger in a defensive triangle with supporting infantry. In normal circumstances, this would require pulling back, calling for artillery, waiting for the fire mission to be approved, and executed 15–20 minutes minimum. by which time the German tanks would have repositioned. Webb's lead tank spotted the Panthers at 8:47 hours. By 8:48, white smoke was rising from their position. Webb's relay tank operator, Corporal James, was already on the artillery net. Fire mission, enemy armor 3 targets grid. First ranging shot, 8:49:30 first, effective impact, 8:50:15. 2.5 minutes from contact to artillery impact. The Panthers never got a chance to reposition. One was destroyed by artillery, the second by a flanking. The Tiger withdrew under smoke. 0 American casualties. By August, the relay tank concept had spread to multiple divisions. Not officially, the Army didn't formally adopt this until late 1944, but through word of mouth. 3rd Armored Division designated Command 6 tanks as relay vehicles. 4th Armored Division went further, adding SCR-300 infantry radios to communicate with accompanying infantry units. 2nd Armored Division developed an expanded smoke code with 7 different for different situations. The common thread: tank crews solving their own problems because the official system was getting them killed. Once again, official doctrine barely acknowledged this innovation. The after-action reports would say things like improved artillery coordination or effective use of supporting fires. They wouldn't mention that the coordination came from unofficial field modifications and techniques developed by junior officers and NCOs. Because to acknowledge it officially would require acknowledging that the radio systems procured by the Army systems that cost millions of dollars were fundamentally incompatible with each other. Easier to let the tank crews figure it out and pretend it was always part of the plan. Lights first time, every time. That was advertising slogan for their cigarette lighters. It became this nickname among German tankers, because it seemed like every that got hit would immediately burst into flames. The numbers were terrifying. Early model M4A1, M4A2 had a 60–80% chance of catastrophic fire if penetrated by enemy fire. Crew survival rates when the tank brewed up, less than 30%. Compare that to German tanks, 30–40% fire risk on penetration, 60–70% crew survival. The problem was ammunition stowage. Early stored their 75 rounds in sponson racks, vertical storage bins along the sides of the hull, just below the turret ring. Look at where those racks are positioned. They're at exactly the right height to be hit by incoming fire, and they're surrounded by, basically nothing, thin armor, no protection. When an enemy round penetrated the hull, it had a straight shot into the ammunition stowage. The shell casings were brass. The propellant was nitrocellulose, basically gun cotton. One spark, and the entire load of 89 shells would cook off in sequence. The Germans called it brewing up. The Americans had more terms. Sergeant First Class James, 4th Armored Division, had watched 4 crews burn to death in 3 weeks. Not killed by the initial hit, killed by the fire that came after. He'd helped pull 1 crew out, or tried to. 2 men made it, 3 didn't. The smell, he never forgot that smell. Started doing something the official maintenance manuals specifically prohibited. He opened up a disabled and studied the ammunition damage from a penetrating hit. What he found confirmed his suspicions. The rounds that exploded first were always in the sponson racks, the ones closest to the entry point. From there, the fire would spread to the other racks, creating a chain reaction. But here's what was interesting. Rounds stored on the floor of the tank, under the turret basket, where they were harder to reach during combat, almost never detonated. Why? Simple physics. Heat rises. The rounds on the floor were further from the initial penetration point and protected by the turret basket structure. Had an idea. On August 3rd, 1944, did something that would have gotten him court-martialed if anyone official had noticed. He removed 30 rounds from the sponson racks and relocated them to the floor. The official was 89 rounds, 75 in sponson racks, 14 on the turret floor. As modified, 45 in sponson racks, reduced, 44 on the turret floor, increased. He kept mostly armor-piercing rounds, the rounds they actually needed for tiger hunting, dumped some of the high-explosive shells they rarely used. Then he did something clever with the remaining sponson rack ammunition. Noticed that veteran crews were already adding sandbags to there for extra protection. It was unofficial but common. Most crews put the sandbags on the outside of the hull, extra armor against and machine gun fire. Put them on the inside. He created sandbag boxes around each remaining sponson rack, not thick, maybe 4–6 inches of sand. The theory, even if the tank was penetrated, the sandbags might absorb enough of the shrapnel energy to prevent the ammunition from detonating, or at least slow the chain reaction enough for the crew to bail out. He also added spare track links, those metal segments from damaged tank treads, as improvised armor around the racks. It added maybe 400–500 pounds to the tank, made it slightly slower. The official maintenance doctrine would have rejected it immediately. But the first time, tank took a hit. August 8, 1944. Took a hit to the right sponson. The German infantry rocket punched through the side armor exactly where the ammunition racks used to be fully loaded. The penetration was clean. Shrapnel and explosive force entered the crew compartment. In a normal, this would have been catastrophic. Immediate ammunition detonation, massive fire, crew dead within 30 seconds. In's modified tank. One round cooked off, just one. The sandbags absorbed most of the shrapnel. The reduced ammunition density meant there weren't enough nearby rounds to create a chain reaction. The crew had time. They bilayed out, all 5 men, burns, some shrapnel wounds, but alive. The tank was a write-off, but the crew survived. Here's the fascinating part. Didn't know it, but he was independently discovering the same solution that Army Ordnance was working on back in the United States. In early 1944, the Army had started developing wet stowage, ammunition racks, ammunition stored in jackets filled with water and antifreeze. The liquid would absorb the heat from a penetration and prevent cook-offs. The first wet stowage started arriving in Europe in August 1944. They reduced fire risk from 60–80% down to about 15%. This field modification achieved similar results. Reduced ammunition density, fewer rounds to explode. Physical barriers, sandbags and track links absorbed energy. Strategic placement, critical ammunition moved to protected areas. Was it as good as engineered wet stowage? No. Did it save lives before wet stowage arrived? Absolutely. By late August, its modification was spreading through the 4th Armored Division. Not officially sanctioned, not mentioned in daily orders. But tank commanders would visit each other's positions after battles and notice. Hey, your sponson racks look different. What's going on? Sandbags inside, reduced ammo load. We've taken 3 hits this month and 0 brew-ups. The technique spread to other units. The method Sandbags plus track links reduced sponson load. The third armored variation, completely emptied front sponson racks, all ammo on floor. The second armored, minimalist, carried only 60 rounds total, just enough for a typical engagement. The British adaptation, they welded additional armor plate inside the sponsons when time allowed. All of these techniques had one thing in common: they were done in the field, by the crews, without official approval. By September 1944, Army Ordnance started receiving reports from the field about these modifications. The official response was complicated. On one hand, some officers were furious. These modifications weren't authorized. They violated warranty terms. Yes, tanks had warranties. They could affect combat performance. On the other hand, the crews doing them had lower casualty rates. The compromise, wet stowage, became standard production by October 1944. For tanks already in the field, commanders were given discretion about ammunition loadout without specifying what that meant. Translation: keep doing what you're doing, but we're not going to officially acknowledge that you're doing it. Let's step back and look at what really happened here. 3 separate tank commanders in 3 separate units discovered 3 different problems that official doctrine didn't address. Robert, Dust Signature Management, Web, Communication Integration. James, Ammunition Safety Modification. None of them were engineers. None were staff officers with access to research and development budgets. They were NCOs and junior officers who watched their friends die and thought, there has to be a better way. And they found better ways. So why didn't official doctrine cover these problems? The answer reveals something fundamental about how military organizations work and how they fail. The doctrine was written by people who weren't doing the fighting. Physical distance. Staff officers in London or Washington couldn't see dust clouds in Normandy. Equipment isolation. Radio procurement was a different department from tank development, from artillery doctrine. Nobody looked at the integrated system. Institutional momentum. Admitting these problems officially would mean admitting mistakes in procurement, training, and doctrine. Complexity of combat. No amount of testing at Aberdeen Proving Grounds could replicate the chaotic reality of hedgerow fighting. The tanks were tested on flat concrete ranges with clear fields of fire. Combat happened in muddy French fields with 8-foot hedgerows, limited visibility, and enemies who knew the terrain. But here's what makes this story important. The solutions came from the bottom up. Not from generals, not from engineers, from sergeants and lieutenants who had enough autonomy to experiment and enough communication networks to spread what worked. This is how wars are actually won. Not by having the best equipment, though that helps. Not by having the best doctrine, though that matters. But by having soldiers who can think, adapt, and share solutions. They didn't become a tiger killer because the army fixed it. They became effective because the crews fixed themselves. By late 1944, all 3 of these field modifications had become semi-official practice. Dust discipline, standard tactical consideration by September 1944. Relay tanks, formally integrated into armored doctrine by November 1944. Ammunition modification, wet stowage became standard production, field modifications tolerated. But here's what the official histories miss. These solutions weren't developed by the army. They were developed despite the army. By individual crews who cared more about surviving than following the manual. This story matters today because the pattern repeats. Every military, every large organization has the same tension. The people making decisions are distant from the problems. The people facing the problems don't have authority to fix them. Innovation happens in the gap, when junior people take initiative and senior leaders are smart enough to let them. The crews of 1944 didn't wait for permission. They fixed what was broken and shared what worked. The next time someone tells you there was just a mediocre tank that won through numbers, remember. They became effective because its crews were exceptional. They took a flawed machine and made it work. Not through firepower, not through armor, but through intelligence, creativity, and the courage to question doctrine when doctrine was wrong. These are the real heroes of the armor war. The sergeants who understood dust. The lieutenants who understood radios. The tankers who understood survival mattered more than regulations. They didn't just drive the tanks. They reinvented how to use them. Want to know the weirdest part of this story? By 1945, when the war ended, Army Ordnance had documented all three of these solutions in official reports. But they didn't credit Webb or by name. The official history just says field modifications proved effective and tactical adaptations improved survivability. As if these solutions appeared through institutional magic rather than individual courage. That's why this video exists. To tell you their names. To tell you what they actually did. Because the real history of the tank isn't about Detroit factories or army procurement. It's about dusty sergeants with notebooks, signals officers with borrowed radios, and determined tankers rearranging ammunition racks. The people the manuals forgot to mention. This one's for them.